Hi everyone. I don't even know what week this is anymore. I think it's week 6. But we are in chapter 8 and 9 today. We're talking about idol worship, and over the next 2 weeks we're going to cover that. So just as a bit of a refresher, Corinthians. Paul's writing to a church that he planted a number of years earlier. And he's had people who've visited the Corinthians. He's heard some troubling stuff. Seems like they've exchanged some letters. They've asked him some questions which have caused him some concern. Fundamentally, the big story of Corinthians is that this is a church that has slipped off of its gospel foundations. Right? It's slipped away from a church that is shaped by the gospel message, and it's resulting, as we've seen, in all sorts of weird growths and unholy behaviors and outlooks. And so since chapter 6, Paul's been working through a list of issues in the church that have resulted from this loss of perspective, and we touched on sexual immorality, divisions in the church, a couple of different things that have come up. And so now he's writing about this issue of idol worship and meat, particularly around the meat associated with idol worship. So a quick sidebar on idol worship. What would happen is within Greek and Roman pagan worship festivals, they would also offer sacrifices. And so you would go to Artemis's temple or Aphrodite, and you would bring some sort of animal with you, and that animal would be burnt on an altar. Although some of it would be burnt on the altar, some of it you might consume on site in a kind of celebratory feastal rite. Some of it you might take home, and a portion of it was left for the temple priests. This is pagan, Roman and Greek temples. We left for the priests as part of a kind of payment to them, but they could only eat so much meat. And so what they would be doing is they would be selling that meat to local butchers. And then the local butchers would make it available at the meat market. And so you'll see reference in these passages to buying idol meat at the meat market, eating it in people's homes, or eating it in the temple. And that is the kind of the context to which Paul is writing to. And so we discover that the Corinthians have been eating this meat, right? And it's quite sort of understandable in the sense that many of them have been saved out of this culture. You can imagine how endemic these moments are. They are probably cultural in some sense. You go to the temple, you do a thing, you have a meal together. There's a kind of community dynamic to it. There's certainly a familiarity with it. There's an economic entanglement where some of the meat you're buying at the butcher, maybe it's like discounted, I don't know. But it's very much a part of the lives that they've been leading. And now, because they have a conviction that there is only one God, one sovereign God, that's actually leading them to be even more comfortable eating some of this meat that has been involved in this worship process. Because they're saying, well, there's just one God, so all these other gods don't exist. They're just golden calves. They're just statues. So it doesn't matter if I eat the meat, which is probably quite relatable. Before I go on, I want to tell you a story to help us kind of get a grip on what's going on in this passage. So I went to an all-boys school, and in South Africa, sport for kids happens at school. There are no private leagues for teenagers. Like if you play rugby or cricket or water polo, whatever it is, it all happens in school. All the leagues are based around one school, then playing sport against another school and that sort of thing. And just like most Victorians love footy, South Africans love rugby. It is currency. It is a massive deal. And so you can imagine at school, the best rugby players right? The first team rugby players are like the top of the social ladder. If you watched American kind of teen angst movies, and you'll often see they had like the school football team and everyone's got their kind of colorful jacket and they wear it, and we didn't have the jackets, and I certainly wasn't a rugby player, but that level of like status was definitely the same. It was a big achievement to be in the first rugby team. Now, I chose a different track in life. Not only did I not play rugby, but I, at the tender age of like 15 or something, was running the school video club. And it did not come with any social entitlements. Let me tell you that. So the thing is though, the rugby coaches wanted people to film the rugby matches so that they could do reviews with their teams afterwards. And so there was, our worlds collided, rugby and the school video club. And so I actually watched a ton of rugby in the last couple of years of my high school career. And what would happen is, not only would we film when they played at the school, but we would sometimes travel with the teams for away matches. And we noticed a weird thing happening. And it wasn't a massive deal, but I think it's a helpful illustration for this story, is that when we traveled with the first team, the guys who were like the best players in the school, 15 of the 700 boys, these were like the 15 top players. It was actually quite pleasant, right? They were like good guys. They were generally pretty friendly. They're very comfortable with who they were. And when we traveled with them, and remember, I'm like a couple years younger than most of them, and in high school that can make quite a difference. But it was not a problem traveling with the first team. But it was not the same traveling with the second team. The second team, still very good rugby players, right? Top 30 in the school, but not quite at the top. And I think the difference was, even though they were objectively good, they chose to use their power and their position for their own benefit. And so they couldn't help needling us on the bus. They couldn't help cut jokes and taking advantage of the young kid on the bus. And so we really did not enjoy traveling with the second team. And it felt like they were using their position for their own benefit. Whereas the first team guys had a confidence and a contentment with who they were, and instead were willing to use their power, shall we say, for the benefit of the weaker, vulnerable video club member. I'm sharing my childhood traumas here with you guys, but as I say, it wasn't a massive deal. But I just thought, kind of a helpful illustration to think of, what are we doing with our power and position? The Corinthians had this new knowledge, and they weren't using it for the benefit of people around them. But we're going to get to that. So, Paul writes in chapter 8, verse 1 to 3, "Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God." So the Corinthians, they've been converted out of this pagan lifestyle, but they're using this newfound knowledge. Paul says, guys, we all know the kind of objective truth of this thing. They're using this knowledge to justify the fact that they're still participating in these pagan worship festivals. And they think, well, there's only one God, so what does it matter? I can use that to my advantage, can continue to participate. And it is somewhat relatable, as I said, because this was probably quite a community moment as well. So I don't want to be too hard on them and assume that we would never have done the same thing. I think it's quite likely that we would have done the same thing, which is why it's important we have these conversations. And so they're continuing to participate, right? But Paul is worried about their behavior and its consequences. They have adopted the second team mindset. How can I use what I know now for my benefit? They're not behaving like first team players. Paul's worried that they're going to confuse maybe recent converts who've been saved out of that pagan worship culture. They come to faith. They're starting to see, actually, man, many of these people in the church, these Christians, are continuing to do all that stuff. So he's worried they're going to get confused. He's also worried that people looking from outside in, trying to understand what it is that it means to be a Christian, will say, well, it doesn't seem like much has changed. They seem to be behaving like the rest of us. They seem to be doing all the things they used to be doing. Nothing really looks that different. We jump chapter 8, verse 10 to 13. Paul says, "For if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not also be encouraged? And if his conscience is weak, that he'll be encouraged to also eat food offered to idols. And so that by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it's weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble." So at this point in the passage, right, Paul was not a member of the video club, nor did he play rugby. I think we can safely assume. But what he does is he then reaches for his own story in chapter 9 to make the point. He says, guys, effectively, I'm going to paraphrase, and he's like, guys, my life is an example of the kind of humility I'm asking you to show in your lives. Okay? It models self-control and sacrifice. He says, you believe that your new status as a Christian gives you the right to continue kind of flirting with idol worship and its proteins. But he says, consider this, guys. Consider my situation as an apostle. I met Jesus at my conversion. I am a founding apostle of the global church, recognized. I'm one of the appointed apostles. And I've planted your church as evidence of that apostolic ministry. This is all in chapter 9. He goes into lots of detail. And he says, just like the other leaders that you recognize, right, I could also be expected to be financially supported in my ministry and to bring along a believing wife and various other things. Chapter 9, verses 19 to 23. It says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." So it's like, even though my position, the reality of my place and my role and my conversion and my appointment, all these things would suggest that I'm entitled to certain rights and certain support. He says, but instead to the Jews I became a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I become as one under the law, although I am not under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, so that I might win those outside the law. And to the weak I become weak, that I might win the weak. I've become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings. I'm sure you've read that passage many times before, and it gets used in a variety of contexts, but it suggests within this broader discussion around idol worship, he's saying, I'm willing to sacrifice some of my entitlement, some of my place, some of my power to become like the people I'm trying to reach, so that I don't distract from the message that I am trying to deliver. So Paul is eager for the Corinthians to be, I'm jumping back here. Yeah, Paul has a first team posture. He realized that even through his unity with Christ and his position in the church, he's entitled to certain support from the Corinthians, but he's willing to give it up without hesitation because he doesn't want to distract from the message that he's bringing. And that is what he's asking the Corinthians to do with their liberty. I think it would be remiss of us not to just pause for a moment and think about our own context and our own era, and what it means to be a Christian today, and think what might be meaningful application in our lives of this cautionary tale, shall we say. And so I think there are probably a number of ways this will play out, and a number of things that might be quite specific to each person. But just to get the creative juices flowing, I wanted to suggest two, and the first one potentially even like a little contentious, but we'll just dive in. So when we talk of idols in the modern world, right, things that, ways we used to live, things we used to value, but now as Christians need to have a different perspective on. We might think of idols of things like power and wealth and comfort, right? Often come up in these sort of discussions. The world tells us that those things are worth sacrificing everything for, right? That's Tim Keller says, good things that we've made ultimate things. That's what an idol is. It's a thing that could be used for good. Instead, we sacrifice all to achieve it instead. So reflecting, observing the world at the moment, I would say, on a global level, we're seeing this sort of quite complex anti-woke pushback happening in the world, right? It's not a Christian movement at its core, I don't believe, but I think it has co-opted Christian communities, and it probably started in the US, but I think it's found fertile ground in many places, including Australia. And I know these things are complicated, and they are things that we likely all resonate with within that push back. But I do also think that we are seeing what I would call some second team mentality playing out within that movement as well. As that pushback against liberalism, woke movement happens, I see quite a lot of emphasis on this movement asserting its rights, claiming its entitlements, using its political force for its own means, instead of using its political weight to serve without giving up that place. Paul's not saying Paul remains as an apostle, but he chooses to use what he's got to serve. And I think we need to keep an eye on the extent that we're going to support it or even participate in it. Are we crossing the line into trying to secure our own entitlements in that pushback? Or are we using the political power we might have, particularly as the church, to say, are we using it to serve? Are we using it to serve the most vulnerable? And the issue, guys, is that it's confusing. Just like Paul was worried about people looking into the Corinthian church and seeing them eating the meat offered to idols, and it confusing them, going, well, these guys are still worshipping idols, they're still doing all this stuff. I think particularly when the Christian community acts in a way that's primarily about securing its own entitlements and rights, it confuses people because they're like, isn't that what everyone does? Isn't that what the entire political world is about? Just the powerful securing what they can for themselves. And I think that's the risk we face here, is that the church is potentially going to get tainted with this view that effectively we're just doing what everyone else does in this moment of pushback. Anyway, food for thought. On a more personal level, as a church, we are moving into a season where, God willing, we might welcome some more people, new people, into our community, people who see the signs outside or the flags or whatever we decide to put up on the main road and come and visit us in the dance studio, come and spend some time with us. And we may welcome in people who are of weaker conscience. Maybe they've got moral positions on things like alcohol or dating. We've talked about that in the last few weeks. Some examples of churches around the world who've got more stringent views on some of these things. We might, God willing, snatch some people from the grip of materialism or a love of money or sexual immorality. Whatever it is. What might we as a church need to forfeit, maybe just for a season, maybe long term, the ways we gather, what we do when we gather, that we don't cause their faith to falter or fracture? Got a very mature group of people in this church at the moment. Will there be things that we need to change, adjust? That people coming in don't come in and think, oh, these guys are just doing what all my old friends used to do. May not be that stark, but food for thought in our gatherings, in our times together. Is there anything, the way we talk, jokes we make, anything like that we might need to put aside for the sake of, as Paul says, reaching many by any means possible? Now, why is Paul so eager to take on this self-sacrificing, humble, first team approach to his faith? Is he just riffing on Christianity? Is he ascetic and he's kind of pushing this more stringent picture onto us? No, he is just doing what Jesus did. Jesus sets the tone, and quote Paul from Philippians, Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Right? That's what the Corinthians are doing. They say, we know this thing now. That means we can do this thing. We can keep doing it. It's great. Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Instead, he made himself nothing. Made himself nothing, taking on the very nature of a servant, being made in human like. We all humans, we think that's pretty good. But if you're God, suddenly you become a human. Flesh. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself. He became obedient to death, even death on a cross. The bar for this thing is high, guys. Jesus has the ultimate first team Christian mentality. That analogy does not do his position justice, but I do want to tie it back so we get it, right? He's using his position to serve. He's using it for the good of others. He gives up being God with all of its transcendent benefits and security and comfort. He gives it all up to win each of us back. Paul says we're his enemies at the time. To win us back from an eternity away from him. It's extraordinary if we think about how far Jesus fell. Paul gave up his salary, whatever, gave up support in some instances for this thing. Jesus gives up being God. He comes to earth as a man and he dies on a cross. So the question we have to wrestle with, we have to let these books challenge us. In our new position, sons and daughters, right, adopted into the family, now sons and daughters of the all-powerful one, our eternal comfort secure, and our concerns about worldly wealth now overshadowed by a confidence in our future inheritance. Will we, like the Corinthians, simply seek to claim the full benefit of our position? Or will we have that first team mindset? It says, what is in my hands? What can I give up to continue the mission? To win by any means, as Paul says. Lord, this is a big ask, Lord. This is a message of sacrifice, of laying down our rights and our entitlements, continuing, Lord, to live like you. And it is a hard thing. If we really take this to heart, Lord, it's hard. It's a big ask. So God, we pray your Spirit, Lord, that you would convince us of this, Lord. That you would allow this thing to sink deep into our souls, Lord. Really shape us and shape our outlooks. Shape how we think about our lives, our church, our involvement in the community, our political influence that we might have, Lord. What does that look like? What does that first team mentality look like for us in the valley today, Lord? Lord, thank you that we do that together as a community. We're not isolated in this thing. We have your Spirit, we have each other. Take us on the journey, Lord. Amen. Cool. Look forward to, I actually will not be part of the chat. We'll be away, but we'll be ably assisted. I hope it's a good chat. Some really good things to jump into here. And we'll see you soon. Bye.